Hey everybody, welcome to the Back to Brilliance podcast. We're your hosts Henry and Joseph. Thanks for tuning in. We ask that wherever you listen, that you subscribe, leave a comment or review. It helps great people like you find our podcast. And with that, we're going to jump into our episode. Today we're talking about becoming unshakable and how identity, emotion, and structure drives your success. In this episode, we're going to explore how emotional repetition shapes your identity, how precise planning dissolves overwhelm, and how consistency reshapes your self-image into someone who simply just doesn't quit. So you can't grind your way into greatness. You have to align your inner drive with strategic execution. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and bring on our co-host, Joseph. Joseph, say what's up. Take it away.
Hey everyone, how's it going? So today I wanted to, kind of follow the kind of format that we've been talking about, which is goal setting. And so I've seen a lot of stuff online recently because I've been engaging online a little bit more. And a lot of people talk about goals and all of that's associated with it. And, some people talk about persistency. And so I felt like it was a good idea to talk about it because, having a great goal is great, having a good plan is good, but those things are only great if you can keep going with it.
Absolutely. Yeah, we always start off fast, right? Like cuz it's such a great idea. Everything seems like it's going to work, but um it's once you put your hand to the plow and start working that you realize like wow, there's actually a lot of work that has to be done. And, the inspiration, the motivation that seems to wear off. So that's where persistence has to kick in, and that's kind of what fuels you or your inner drive to keep going. And, again, just writing it out, planning it out is the beginning steps, but staying persistent with it is going to help carry it out and execute.
Yeah, definitely. And, I could really speak to that personally because, at the beginning of the year, I was super, super stoked, and I still am about, all of the stuff that I've been getting into, just all of my personal brand stuff and all of that. And so I was going to bed at 3 a.m., waking up at 8 a.m., starting again and repeating every day. And so that fire, it kind of died as far as I'm not staying up at 3 a.m. still. But thing is like I was like, okay, now that I've kind of lost that initial spark, how can I keep going? How can I keep this fire alive, right? And so, you know, desire is the real starting line, right? So we talked about it last episode, but it's your why, really define what your why is. And not only that, but define why you want your goal, right? So there is a big why, or like the most basic why, so Henry shared it was for his family, right? To help support his family, keep the lights on, keep the food on his table for his family. But, he can also kind of dig a little bit deeper as to why does he want that? And so that will really not only define your why even better, but it will help him define what his drive is.
And it goes deeper than the why, and I learned this. It's more of the who, like who are you serving? You have to ask yourself who you're serving. And so they all go hand in hand. And this is something like that you learn kind of along the way on the journey. But that's why it's important that you read and you find these tools out for yourself, because there's no one way to cross that finish line. And like Joseph just said, desire is the real starting line. So you have the desire for the why, but it's also the desire for the who are you trying to serve and who are you doing it for. And even though we're doing it for ourselves and our families and stuff like that, but the people that we serve, and that's where the persistence comes in, because again, sometimes you're going to run across people that rub you wrong in business and stuff like that. And it's like, oh man, but it's that persistence, and just remembering the reason why you started these things in the beginning, So it's usually from obsession, that you were obsessed with the idea, the longing and the desire to create something, whatever your brand is, whatever your product or service is, just knowing your why and who you're serving is going to really help you, along the road and keeping you on that persistence.
Exactly. And again, a big part of it is your why needs to stir up an emotion within you, right? If you're kind of indifferent about your why, that's not a true why. You need something that will, light a fire underneath you, which is, why it's the starting line. But also, just repetition builds identity, right? So, you know, falling in love with the process. There are people, great sport athletes. They're like, I'm in love with the game. I'm married to the game. Or, people say like, I'm married to my career. It's because they fall in love with it, right? But not only that, fall in love with the outcome and do that daily because, willpower is a very finite thing. It's like a muscle, right? You can't always flex your muscle. You can't always strain your muscle. So you need to have something that supports that through, momentum, like we've talked about, and visualization. So, things like that will really help you understand your why, but also get into the groove of things.
Right. Yeah. Repetition, like you just mentioned, with athletes like Kobe Bryant, he was one of the greats because of repetition. He would go long before the game started and he would just go shoot baskets and shoot baskets and shoot baskets, and that built him to be, the goat that he is, or was, and with that, you do that in business as well, so in life and in all these things, you build these repetitions because willpower alone isn't enough to keep you going, you got to have that drive, and that burning desire to succeed, and with that, it's going to help you to become unshakable, so it is a muscle that has to be worked and exercised, and it comes with repetition. Like for instance, if you're in sales and you can't stand being told no, that's part of the job. It's like you have to work for the no because eventually you're going to get to the yes, so it's like 50 no's to one yes. So if you can't stay persistent in that, then sales is not for you, so but what I'm saying is that repetition is going to help you to build that muscle and help you to become unshakable.
Exactly, yeah. And so I want to just kind of point out that people who persist the longest, most often they're not the most talented, right? So, you might start with someone like with a friend or whatever, or you might know a friend who's like, oh, I'm going to start a business or I'm going to start something. And then like, that they're talented, but they don't really stick with it. And so it doesn't matter how talented you are. It's all about, how much drive do you have? And a lot of the times, and I could speak for myself, it's because they're not attached. They're not attached. They're not in love with the process. They didn't fall in love with it like I just said. So again, you may have a lot of talents, but all of those talents are only good if you stick with it.
One of the things that I've always stuck to, in the hard times when, things got really tough is I've always said this to myself and I say it a lot, quitters never win, winners never quit. So that's one, for the books that's going to help you to stay persistent. So whenever you feel like giving up, say that to yourself. Winners never quit, quitters never win. And, that's going to help you. That's like strategic persistence, so it's planning that keeps you moving, persistence, is it's a tough muscle to build, because when you get hit a lot of times and stuff like that, it's like, okay, well, what do I do? So it's like, well, what's your backup plan if this happens, right? And sometimes some people don't think that far ahead. So that's where, planning with precision comes along, and just helps you. Like, my another thing that I learned is if it's gonna fail, fail fast so you can move on, and when you do start to grow from this and you start to build that muscle, you're going to start to see how much easier things become when you start planning, strategically.
Exactly. Yeah. So, you know, like Henry just said, planning with precision. So, if you're able to break your goal into actionable steps and sequence of priority, then you're able to have a plan for to help you perform. But also, it's not just busy work, right? It's a means of training your mind, training your focus muscle, and just training yourself to show up every day. An example of this I can give recently is I've been posting every day on Twitter to help build my personal brand. And so, you know, even though I'm not posting on every platform there is, and I could be posting on YouTube as well and Instagram, I was like, you know what? Let me just build up the muscle of posting every day on a social media platform. That way, I'm already in the rhythm of posting to one platform, and that way, once I start expanding to different platforms, it's already in my day, in my daily habit to post on at least one platform per day. And so, again, that's part of one of my action steps or actions. Um, my plan of action rather, to get clients, because X is a very good platform for networking, and I've positioned myself into an area where my niche is. So every day I'm reacting with potential clients.
Yeah, one step, every day builds that, momentum, the motion, and that leads to motivation and starts to, build you up. It's those small little wins that compound over time, So it's like it's the little things that you do that make the biggest difference, That's why we said on our previous podcast, just take three things a day, no matter how big or small they are, but those compound, over time. So, if it's just one platform that you're on, then be consistent at it, and be persistent, and you're going to see the fruit of the labor that you're putting into it, But if that's why I always say, he who chases many rabbits catches none. Because if you try to, I'm going to do X, I'm going to do, IG, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, then you're constantly thinking, well, I don't want to post the same thing on all platforms. So now you're coming up with more work, more stuff. So just planning with precision, keep it simple, small steps, but it brings about big wins.
Exactly. And that's, what happened was, I was tasked to post on Instagram and Twitter, and it took me a week to really get into it, because I was like, I have to make two different types of content that I don't really want to make. I didn't want to post on Twitter. I was like, it's not really my thing. I've never really been a social media guy like that. So, there was a lot of mental resistance. And so I was like, okay, let me just do one thing. That way, again, I could build up my wins every day. I just increased my daily metrics. That way, the win feels even better because it's a little bit more workload. So again, I'm doing that. That way I can build momentum and motivation, right? So, and within that, you know, base your plans on competence and not guesswork, right? So whenever you have a plan, don't build it off of things that you're like, "Ooh, I might be able to do that," or, you know, uh, I one day I can get up to that. No, make a plan that that you could do. So for my Twitter example or my X example, I was like, okay, do 20 replies per day and 3 posts per day, right? Just 3. And so I could even post in the morning, evening, and night if I really wanted to break it up that way. But It was something very achievable. It wasn't like, I think I'll be able to do that. I might be able to do this. No, it was a very grounded goal. That way I could achieve what I'm trying to do. And I'm not just like, oh, I might be able to do 100 replies in a day and not really know what that looks like.
Getting out there, again, in the beginning, it's always gung ho. You go fast, 1,000 messages, and then, week 2, week 3, week 4, things start to slow down. And that's when, um, persistence has to kick in, So once you've created that, little actionable plan, with precision, and you're doing the same things, every day, just one step, closer, it's going to, compound, and it's going to help you, that persistence, it becomes like a superpower for you, to help you to carry on, and again, just setting those simple goals, timelines, I personally think it's good to put a little timeline on things. Like I said, my stuff is usually 90 days if I start a project, just so I can gauge where it's at, and stuff like that. But once your persistence, begins to grow and compound, and that muscle gets stronger, it begins to transform you into someone basically who can't be stopped, because the persistence, it's like a locomotive. Once it takes a little while, but once it's up and running, that's it. It's going, and it can't be stopped. So stick with the persistence. Stay persistently. Whatever it is what you're doing, even if you're not seeing the fruit at the moment, but you already know because you put the base plan in place. You're not just guessing that this might work. You kind of already have your plan. So, that's why we say, plan your plan, then work your plan.
Exactly. That's a great phrase. And I kind of just want to touch upon this as well. Progress often stalls not because of laziness, but because of the uncertainty, right? And again, I could speak to that personally. I felt very uncertain with a lot of things that I was doing previously, because I was like, oh, I don't know about this, I don't know about that. And so I leveled up my skills. And now I know what the A to Z looks like, or maybe even A to D, right? You don't need to know the full picture to get started. So again, just kind of know what you're doing, know how to do it, and that will really help you with your drive and your being persistent. And so I also kind of want to pivot to how persistence becomes a superpower or a power, right? Kind of like what Henry was just saying. The magic of persistence, it doesn't help you only achieve your goals, but like Henry just said, it really helps you transform into someone who you may not even recognize, right? For me, I've been doing this podcast consistently, and this whole year, I've been a completely different person because of all the things that I've been doing consistently. And, where I would have, if I were doing this alone, or even if it was every other year except for this year, because I've been putting a lot of effort into becoming a better person. Maybe not better, but, just a more persistent person. We would have only gotten up to episode 10 probably, maybe not even. And so again, like, now that I've helped formulate my drive, and, I asked myself what my why was, now I'm really able to pump out content every day, whether it's on X and then as well as the podcast. So again, this kind of goes into the next point, which is leveraging support and accountability. So, although sometimes we may not like to build in public or even have a friend keep us accountable, it's very powerful, because not only are you able to get feedback from someone, but it really puts a fire underneath your feet. Because, if you're like, okay, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do X amount of things this week, and you don't get it done, you can have your friend or even the community, keep you accountable, be like, hey, bro, why didn't you do it? What stopped you from doing it? And so on and so forth.
Yeah, no, that's what, mastermind groups or mentors, or just having that accountability group or partners, it'll help you with staying persistent, because even though you have accountability partners, you can bluff people all day long, right? But you can't bluff yourself, so it's like the persistence. You can get motivation, inspiration, kick in the shorts, from people, but the actual hard work, the persistency has to come from within. So like that inner why or who you're doing it for, has to be solidified. You have to make that decision because, you want to leverage that support and the accountability from the group, from the people around you. But it all at the end, it comes down to us just, being persistent. And let me just tell you from, experience that there's been times where I've just walked away from things for various reasons, right? And it's like, okay, cool. And then I walk away and I think, man, I should have just stuck with it, And, and when I start something new, I always take that into consideration. It's like, all right, just staying persistent, sometimes, things come around and stuff like that. I know it's kind of going a little off topic, but just my point is that like when you're dealing with persistency, it comes down to like your willingness and your desire, how strong is your desire and your willingness to accomplish that.
Exactly. Yeah. And so that's really powerful because, how much do you want it? The common phrase, how bad do you want it? And oftentimes not bad enough. And, that's something that I've really had to face the music with myself is how bad do I want things, right? How bad do I want to see change? How bad do I want to see success? And so, I've really had to be honest with myself in that. And so, you can really build your identity through consistent action, right? So high achievers, they don't just try persistence, they become it, right? So, I'm sure you've seen a friend who's really competent, they're like, oh, I'll give it a try. And so, they'll give it a try. They'll, in 2 weeks or so, you'll be like, hey, so how's that thing? How's your how's your cake decorating thing? And they're like, oh, that I gave it up in 3 days, right? So again, high achievers, they don't just try something, they become it.
Yeah, very true. And that's the thing. It's just, count the costs before you go through with it, because everything has a price, right? And in that price, you have to really consider it, do I have what it takes, And the reality is you do. The answer is you do, but are you willing to put in, the effort for it? Because in order to accomplish it, whatever it is you're going through, you're going to have to be persistent, So becoming unshakable, is definitely, a muscle that has to be worked. Like we said, you have to use persistence, to get there. So the desire, again, is the starting point, and repetition, helps you to build that momentum and to get to the next level, which becomes unshakable, and then planning with precision, and just doing, even if it's just one small step a day, that's going to help, build that small wins, and it compounds over time, So, and since you already wrote this out and you have it planned, it's not guesswork. So you know what you're doing, you know what you're up against, and like we said, use your, leverage your support and accountability, and with that, I want to just bring Joseph back in if he has any closing thoughts before we end the podcast.
Yeah. So again, really know why you're doing something, right? And then know, like Henry said, know who you're helping. That way you can really start to define what your fire is. Because for me, that's what really held me back was I never had a why. And I knew that. I knew I didn't know what my why was. So really sit down, define what your why is, and then make a plan with that or from that. And again, make it so that you're able to do it, something you're able to execute on. Don't try to overachieve on your goal. But yeah, so I kind of just want to give a shout out to our community because, we've built a community just for this, right? So if you're an entrepreneur tired of doing everything alone, we have a community that combines practical self-growth tools, real community support, as well as weekly structure to help you stay focused and follow through. So again, if you need an accountability partner, or if you want to help figure out what your why is with the community support, that's what we're there for. So that's at backtobrilliance.com. If you scroll down to our community tab, you'll be linked up with like-minded people like you.
Well said, bro. Well, everybody, thank you again for tuning in to our podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment or review. Helps great people like you find our podcast. And with that, we're out. Till the next time, stay blessed.
Bye-bye.